Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm Dear Darling. I shall see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today, where we'll be, well, as you can tell probably by the title, talking about Chants of Sennaar. And if you are a follower of a YouTube channel, you might be like, hold on a minute, Dear Darling, you didn't have a Let's Play with Chants of Sennaar. Well, I suppose this is a time, if ever, to plug the fact that I stream. I stream every Sunday. My time it's 2 to 5, so that's I guess GMT +1 currently, because I think we're in British summertime. I don't know, minus like 4 to 8 of that, I suppose, if you're American time or, you know, whatever GMT time you are. But anyway, good evening, everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 9:37 p.m. on Monday, June 17th, 2024. But yeah, in the most recent stream, I've you can see the stream VODs on the YouTube channel, or you can go to the Twitch. The Twitch channel, if you want to see them like within the streams within the past 7 days, but a week later I do upload them to YouTube, mainly because they just take a long time to process, to be honest. So I would upload them the same day if they would process fast enough, to be honest. But yeah, I played through Chants of Sennaar, and it was a great time. I'll warn you before I get into any spoilers of it. How I would summarize Chants of Sennaar: is it a perfect game? No, I don't think it's a perfect game. I think it's a really good game, but it's not perfect. After thinking about it a lot, but I think it's weirdly, despite not being a perfect game, despite being, I don't know, I think it would depend on how much you like puzzles and that sort of deductive reasoning. The game may range anywhere from like a 4 to a 10, depending on who you are. I think it's, it's a specific, not that specific, but if you like puzzle games, I think you'll love Chants of Sennaar. In fact, if you like puzzle games, I almost say like Chants of Sennaar might be required playing, because there's so few games like it. I mean, I've played a game like it called Heaven's Vault. Basically, the TLDR, if you don't know what Chants of Sennaar is, it's a game about deducing and translating a language through intuition, and it follows a sort of what's it called, Escape of the Obra Dinn style detective thing, but instead of like fates of people, you are deducting a language. It's not like that, like baked in with linguistical knowledge and that sort of thing, so you don't really need to know much. I mean, you just need to know your own language, I suppose, and a basic idea of like how language works to be able to play it, I think. But if you like puzzle games, it's almost required playing because there's so few games like it. The only other game I know about deconstructing a language is Heaven's Vault, but that is sort of like much more exploration based. You kind of feel more like an archaeologist there, while here you feel more like an actual translator, like a diplomat, I suppose, in a sense. But yeah, that's why I say it's almost like required playing, because it's, I mean, out of the 2 games I played, like best in its genre, I suppose, of that thing. It's not perfect, I say, mainly because it does the language for puzzle elements pretty damn well. It's kind of like this sort of like language puzzle translation game crossed with a point and click adventure game, somewhat. And the point and click adventure game is mostly fine, but it has some weird like non-puzzle elements in it, which I guess is kind of meant to break up the flow of the game, but honestly, my personal opinion is they're not that great. But still, that's kind of like my overarching point of a game. The thing which I think really elevates Chants of Sennaar is the fact that I think it's actually like incredibly well designed, and not from a sense of like I think its puzzles are necessarily incredibly well. I mean, the puzzles are well designed, like the way language works. Basically, I suppose that overarching, like now we're getting into mild spoilers, how it works is you'll be given like a situation where you see glyphs of a language being used, and you sort of just infer from context what they might mean, and you basically had to guess. And after you see enough of them and the game goes, okay, you could theoretically deduce what these words mean by this point, you basically had to fill in a notebook, and if you which you basically had to confirm your guesses for about like 3 to 5 of the words, and if you are correct, the book will be like, yes, you're done, you're correct, and if you're wrong, the book will not say which ones are correct and which ones aren't. I've read a lot of reviews now, and I've seen like more videos about Chants of Sennaar to like really solidify and like consider different viewpoints on it. A lot of people say it's reasonably handholdy for a puzzle game, which is interesting because I didn't get that vibe that much when I played the game. If anything, I felt like rather than the game being handholdy and like giving me hints, I felt the game was too slow. Like those as I say, the game only gives you, instead of like Obra Dinn style, where you get all the glyphs and then you can enter in when you think you're right, and you can enter in whatever combination. Chants of Sennaar gives you only the books, the pages where it thinks, hey, you should have been able to work out what these words mean by this point. A lot of people say it's handholdy, and from what I understand. It feels hand-holdy in the sense that if you've not figured them out beforehand, or if you're someone to much more like brute force, like, you know, you figured out 2 of them, you're just going to trial and error the last character, which you don't know. It feels very handholdy because it's sort of giving you the sense. And I think that's fair. You know, I think it's very easy just to sit here and be like, they're playing the game wrong. That's not how it should be. But no, everyone plays the game differently. So if that's the experience they had, that's the experience they had. And I can totally see how that happens, because the game basically, before you even finished guessing like what a character might have been, or like seeing it used in enough context for you to give something, it might jump in too early and completely give the game away, especially with the fact that initially you have to guess what the character means, but once you get the thing right, it gives you what it should mean. You can completely misinterpret characters, and only upon it being locked in, being like, oh, I actually got this one completely wrong. But, you know, rather than being a puzzle game where you figure it out later, where you see it used in another context which no longer makes sense, it's very much, you also notice I'm focusing on a lot of negatives, and I don't mean to do that. It's just how I end up critiquing things for no apparent reason. It's, yeah, that's just kind of like how it goes. It sort of like feels like it robs that agency away from you, which I understand that point, but I would just say that my personal experiences, I didn't find that, because I found myself getting ahead of the book multiple times, where I was like, I'm pretty sure I know what these are, I just need to wait for the book to actually let me lock them in. There's only like 2 times I can remember off the top of my head being like, oh, I by the time the page gave me the book gave me the pages to guess, I was like, I don't know what all of these mean. And I think it was during the Bard's World, to be perfectly honest. And one of them was, I can't remember. One of them was because I completely missed the context of when one character was used, I think. Like it was the one for ascending upwards or go upwards. I completely misinterpreted. So, you know, fair enough. But, you know, I also think it's contributed by the fact the way I play is I gotta have a good justification and reasoning every time I try and solve a puzzle. You can see that in Return of the Obra Dinn, I suppose. Mainly that, like, I would not put in someone's answer unless I knew for sure, or I had a good justification in my mind of what it was. I hate doing just guesswork in puzzle games, because I'm like, that kind of defeats the point of it. Of course, not all puzzle games, you know, fit that mold. Some have to have a little bit of trial and improvement in there, but at least all these sort of puzzle games, if I can deduce it, I will try and deduce it. So I never really fell into that. What I do agree, though, with like a very common criticism of this game is the stealth sections of a game are not great. Like, I kind of get what they're going for, because now we're getting into like all spoilers, bets are off. Now with Chants of Sennaar, I get what they're going for. It's meant to be like a different sort of puzzle, rather than it's a puzzle where it's sort of timing based. But the mechanics don't really like lend well to it. It's not a game with like great movement options in the first place, nor is it particularly clear all the time exactly what's happening. Like, the thing which really strikes out to me is the lightning bolt guardians at the end who just shoot you if they have line of sight of you. It's not a game built around line of sight, so, you know, it's sort of like ambiguously unclear. It's only the fact that these stealth puzzles are so straightforward that there is no ambiguity, I suppose, in them. If there were more difficult like stealth sections or puzzles, then it would just be like, this is like a frustrating mechanic, I suppose, in this game, which doesn't feel like it was built for it. But because they were so straightforward, really my criticism of it is that they don't feel in place in this game. I understand the need in a game to break up, like have changes the pace, because things get stale after a while. Sometimes you need a breather. You need, like, in puzzle games, high intense moments are like really digging deep down into a puzzle and like connecting all the dots together. Sometimes you need something light. But the thing is, they did that in the game. They had moments where you had like breathers, you could step back with like the adventure game-esque moments. Like, I think the clearest example is probably when you play like Flappy Bird during the Bard the Bard language section. You take a break from like this, the Bard language being probably one of the hardest languages, I think, to learn. It's very intense, and you just have a break partway through where you just like play Flappy Bird or you play Whack-A-Mole. You have a break partway through the Bard language where you're just like watching a play. These are like the nice sort of breakups which I think fit the game better. But then like the stealth sections just feel, I'm not going to say necessarily arbitrary, because I feel like it does help contribute to the atmosphere in the night section, but it doesn't feel like. The one that makes me more sort of question is the one in the Anchorite section, where it's just like, why is this like the final gauntlet boss thing, rather than being like I guess you could say the final boss is technically like we're making connections or translating from one language to another, but I'm like, that is the perfect sort of like final boss, but that's more like a secret final boss. The real final boss is like doing these weird stealth sections, hiding from the the lightning bolt, like golem guardians, which is just like, okay, I guess. I guess it kind of, to me, it feels a little bit anticlimactic, but so be it. So that's my critique of the game. But the pros I have of this game, but there's like numerous of them. One of them, which is a small thing I'll say, is I think this game is incredibly well paced. Like, it feels like the difficulty curve works. The only point I would say the difficulty curve no longer kind of works is I think the Anchorite section is probably a bit too easy, and maybe the Bard section is a bit too hard. Like, it almost feels like the Alchemists and the Bards should be switched, or the Alchemist language should be a bit harder, but nonetheless. And sometimes the adventure game stuff was a bit iffy, like not entirely clear of what it could do or where to go. But I almost feel like there should be a map or something, but you know, it's not like that complex thing, so that's like not that crazy. But yeah, this game is actually like incredibly well paced. Like the way they drip feed you how to translate, how to work with like a devotee's language is fantastic. It's just like step by step, and then we have like a small challenge towards the end. I mean, they shake it up entirely with the knights, not shake it up entirely, but by giving you the knight's language, being like, okay, the devotee was the training tools, now we're going to run a knight's language, we're going to make it a bit harder, you know, the syntax has changed, the forms aren't exactly clear, we're not going to give it to you in the most direct way possible. And then you get to the bard language, and there's another escalation once again, where it's like, okay, you know, you had that going on before, now the bard language has a completely different subject verb object structure. Rather than being subject verb object, it's now object subject verb. Which it was like, whoa, this is crazy. And then you get to the alchemist section, which I would have loved the alchemist section to also have like a different subject verb object order, to be perfectly honest. Like maybe it could have been like subject object verb or something. I would have thought that would be really cool, just to have it be a change up to keep a sort of like escalation going of like increasing difficulty. Because let's be real, the people who are playing this game want that sort of like escalation in difficulty, right? But nonetheless, the alchemists have like this numerical system, which to me was pretty easy, I think, to deduce. But maybe for some other people, it would be like, this is actually quite difficult to understand or wrap your head around what's going on. And then you get to the Anchorite section, which is like, okay, now you need to put everything together, which I do think it's a little bit rushed. I do feel it was the least satisfying language to translate, but I understand what we're going for, where it's like meant to be the final one which sort of unifies all the points, where it's like, okay, instead of learning it from the dialogue, you had to learn it from the other languages, kind of. You had to show that you know the other languages and can translate between them well enough to get this language unlocked. And then there's this really cool section where you see how the Anchorite language is very sort of like formulaic, and it's built upon each other. More so than the other languages where, you know, I can't remember them, but like people, I don't remember, like the way the symbols overlap with each other adds like formative and additions to each other to make new glyphs. That was really cool. And then like the ultimate final boss test is now you know all the languages, go back to all the terminals, translate the languages from one to another. That is a brilliant, I must say, an absolutely brilliant final test of the ability, because I was like, you know, and part of me just wishes that some of the languages was a little bit more difficult to make it even feel like more of a challenge. Like if the alchemist language had different subject verb object order, it would be such a delicious challenge, being like, okay, how do I translate from alchemist to the bard language? Both of them have different like grammatical structures to English, and the language I natively speak. So then it's sort of like you're having to do like this sort of liaison between the two, and that would be fantastic, in my opinion. But, you know, so be it. It still works pretty well. But leading on to that, I suppose, we're actually, surprisingly, the puzzle elements, I don't think is the best part of, well, maybe it's one of the best parts of the game. It is actually very, like, crunchy and, like, fun to participate in. But one of the coolest parts of this game, I suppose, is the way it does this sort of, like, environmental storytelling. Which is something much more I subtly picked up on when I played, but I never really sat down to think about it too much. But culture is very ingrained, and like different cultures very ingrained within our society right now, of course, you know. Or we have loads of different countries, like 300 or something different countries in the world, all their own unique and different cultures, you know. How something is celebrated in one place could be seen as something which is, you know, repulsed in another culture or another country. And that's cool, you know, by the sharing, this cultural exchange that we can have with other people means that we, you know, as a human society can see what, you know, makes us same, what makes us different, and still be connected together on these fronts. And this is a game which really explores that, I suppose, whether it's sort of Tower of Babel Tower of Babel narrative. Tower of Babel being like a religious story where basically they try to get people try to get closer to God, and then I think like God strikes them down, being like, you can't do this, and then makes them all speak different languages. I had this conversation with the person who actually donated the game in the first place, Cyborg X7, who I'm sure you'll probably appear in the comments maybe for this video, I don't know. But we said it was like an anti Tower of Babel, where it's sort of like, oh, you know, that's really not the moral we should be learning from this. The moral that we should be learning from that should be the inverse, where everyone's different, but we try and unite each other over our common ground and things like that, which is a really beautiful way to do it. But what I think is really cool is how the culture sort of shows up through the languages. There's that very like beautiful, subtle art of storytelling interwoven within the mechanics of a game, which is really cool to see. But basically there's like these different castes, I suppose, within this tower. At the very bottom you have the devotees, who are basically this devout sort of religious group who worship like a god above all else or something, and they're kind of seen as like the bottom of the pack, kind of. And then you have like this militaristic caste who are like, I can't remember what they're called, like the soldiers or knights? No, the warriors, that's it. The warriors, who see the caste beneath them as impure fools or something, essentially, and they have like this worship of music, because they worship the chosen one being the caste above them, being these bards, and it's very interesting to see the sort of dynamic between them, of course, as well. But the bards, of course, see beneath the knights as just sort of like idiots, like morons, really, and they have their own sort of divide in society, where they have like the rich nobles, and then they have like these like slaves, essentially, who are also seen as idiots. And then above them you have the alchemists, who are much more sort of practical, I suppose, with the way they see things. Everything is like factual to them. And above them you have the anchorites, who are sort of like this detached almost species from them, who are like trying to get to like this ascendancy, and it's interesting to see how these different cultures appear. Like the devotees are so like religious and worship, that they have much more simple concepts like translated through their language. The devotee language is the easiest to understand, and it's the one which is most built out, I think, through the radicals, the easiest patterns to end up spotting, because everything is so direct. Like, you know, what is a plural? How do you pluralize things? You just say the same thing twice. How do you say me and you, etc., 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 etc.? It's just like a person plus, you know, I can't remember the language off the top of my head, but everything is so like building block fundamental. It makes sense. And then like the warrior language has some really interesting things as well. Not only does it have like this much more militaristic, sharp looking language compared to the much more sort of cuneiform sort of language which the devotees have, the warriors are sort of like a conglomerate, like unity, like of mind. They're like for the kingdom sort of thing. There's not much of a sense of individuality in there, which is repeated in the fact of our language. They don't have like individual words for like me or you, like the other languages do. They just say warriors, or people get referred to by their profession, which is sort of just like their contribution to society is how it's reflected. The bards have a completely different structure in the first place. Maybe it's experimental, who knows. They have a very nice flowing writing system, like sort of reminiscent to me of Arabic, but I don't really know languages well enough to tell you what it is reminiscent of. But the bards are the first ones to introduce things like question marks, I suppose, which is interesting as well. But like they have a society, I can't remember what I was going to say about the bards. I'm sure I had more to say about the bards, but I actually genuinely can't remember anymore. But it's interesting through that. And with the alchemists, of course, one thing which is really cool, which is pointed out, was the fact that their writing system is actually really, really cumbersome. Like they have like all these circles and like crossing lines and very geometric, a huge amount of geometric shapes need to go into every single like word. Which compared to the much more simpler ones of the previous ones. But their number system is ruthlessly efficient. Like if you wanted to say any number from 0 to 1,000, you can do it 0 to, is it 1,000? Yeah, 0 to 1,000. No, 0 to 10,000, almost. You can do it in literally one character. Boom, it's done. It's so incredibly efficient. But saying something, I can't remember what example they used, something like, I love music, takes 3 very cumbersome music characters to draw in the first place. And then fairy language is very sort of pragmatic. But there are so many interesting things. Like the thing I love, mega spoilers, is the fact that I sort of caught on, but I was just like, oh, the thing which is actually, you know, the god that the devotees worship is the connections between them, represented by the, it's not tetrahedron, I guess, but the 5 dots, all with the interconnected connections between each other. But how the fact that it's represented as the object of desire in each of the cultures, just differently, is really cool. Like, it's God to the devotees, the religious worshippers, but to the warriors, they don't, you know, it's not God which is important to them, it's a sense of duty, a sense of, like, relationship to their community, I suppose, in a sense. Like, what they represent as an order, as an empire together. Unity, the strength. And then to the bards, it's beauty. It's this creative freedom that they are willing to express and explore through artistic mediums. That's what is the highest ideal and order to them. To the alchemists, it's transformation, where it's kind of like they want to see what the limits they can push, how much they can learn about the world and the things that they can transform. Well, interestingly, to the anchorites, it's exile being this like false heaven that they were like trying to get into, and they all subjected themselves to, but rather than it being this sort of like ideal paradise, you find many like dead anchorites who have like long died within this simulation. It's a very sort of like false heaven, false paradise, but that's still being like what they aimed to do, and then ended up causing like a sort of downfall of their own society in a way. And there's another really cool thing about how the languages interact with each other, with the way things are referred to each other, which is pointed out, which I only like. I think I only picked up on one of them, but pointed out to me by Cyborg, was the fact that each language refers to things differently. Like the warriors refer to the devotees as impure because they see them as beneath them, but they refer to the bards as the chosen ones, despite the fact that despite them being like, oh, the bards are the chosen ones just because they make music. Every single bard is just like a regular other bard to the bard society themselves, which is amazing. But the bards then refer to both the warriors. I don't know if they ever refer to the devotees as like idiots, right? It's interesting that way, just to see how the different word choices are used. Another one I think about is the fact that in the alchemist language, the anchorites are referred to as fairies, I guess giving them this sort of like mythical feeling to them. It's weird because the alchemists, the scientists, are very sort of pragmatic, I suppose, with our language. I think someone brought up like they don't have a word for not. Or no, they do have a word for not, but it's like never used in spoken conversation. The only time it appears is in a translation for the bard language or something, which is like crazy because they only talk in absolutes or something like that. But it's interesting that they refer them to fairies, like a mythical creature, because maybe they don't even understand the anchorites in the first place. And how the bards saw the alchemist as a monster, because, you know, the story of like the idiot bard and them finding a monster was actually them finding an alchemist in the end. It's just like these small things like this, which are like pretty cool about like, it really does well to build upon the sort of like subtle storytelling in as you go through the game, where you sort of get the vibes of what's going on. The devotees tend to be like quite nice and quite welcoming, I suppose, and then this very materialistic warriors, and then the very snooty bards you go up to, then the alchemists who are just overly pragmatic, like they're the only society with a sense of time, I suppose, intrinsic to them. They have a lunchtime, everything is regimented, everything is ordered. It's very cool like that. I don't know what other things I want to say to it. I felt like I had so much more to say. But like the way the fictional language is built and the way it interacts with each other really is cool. The way they sort of like do this sort of storytelling. That's why I'm bringing up the TV trips of Chants and Sennaar to see if it reminds me of anything that I wanted to talk about. So that's kind of like why I say it's like a must play if you like puzzle games, because that sort of like slow revelation, that slow sort of understanding that you gain for it, and the world slowly being built up in that way is really, really cool and very unique, I think. But yeah, is there anything else I wanted to say? Yeah, I don't know. There's probably more things, I don't know. Go watch Chants and Sennaar more thought through video essay than my random off the top speaking, if you want. But it's really genuinely a cool game, which I appreciate amusingly more after I played it. Like, I had a fun time while I was playing it and doing all these like small mechanics in the game, but then I appreciated it even more after playing it, just being like, oh, look at all the things which are reflected in the culture by the way the language is built, or by the way you look at the world in it. Just like the word choice in each of the languages is really interesting, and the way they interact and the literal translations. It's very cool. Right? Anyway, on that note, I think I'm going to round this episode off here. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been firstly, if you have any thoughts on Chants or Sennaar, you played it yourself, do let me know in the comments below. Why not? I will read it eventually. But if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again. But for now, it's our farewell. So until next time. Oh, not sit down. Stand back up. Bye-bye for now.